Welcome back to Morbid Cases. If you're new here and you love disturbing murder stories, please destroy the like button and subscribe so you won't miss any future videos like this one. So today's episode is a little different. I have 3 cases to share with you that I had never heard of, and they all share one major factor. Each crime was committed by a teenager. These kids destroyed lives in very brutal and unjustified ways. Let's take a look at 3 of the most repulsive crimes committed by teens. In June of 2006, in St. Petersburg, Florida, a 17-year-old boy named Blake Stryker had left his home in the 1200 block of 74th Street to visit a friend around 2 a.m. When this friend wasn't home, Blake stated he walked back to his house around 3 a.m., and that's when he saw his neighbor, 47-year-old Jenny Hartley, standing in her yard. I'm not exactly sure what led the two to talking in the yard, but Blake states that he asked Jenny for some water and if he could use her bathroom. They went inside, and he says Jenny made a advance and then drew a knife and threatened him with it. This reminded Blake of the time he was abused by an older female when he was younger. He says that they then fought over the knife, resulting in him gaining control and stabbing Jenny to death. Jenny was found the day after she was killed. Her mother went to the house when she couldn't get a hold of Jenny, and she found her just inside the home, which I assume means she was probably near the front door or near an exit to the house. Blake's accounts of the events appears to be fabricated. Firstly, who visits a friend's house at 2 a.m.? If someone were to do so, it would be reasonable to ensure that the friend is actually home. Personally, I wouldn't arrive unannounced at my parents' house at that hour. Additionally, why was Jenny found standing in her yard at 3 a.m.? That scenario is also questionable, and the most concerning aspect of his narrative is the fact that Jenny was stabbed over 45 times, with the medical examiner identifying a total of 50 penetrating wounds. This strongly suggests premeditation, a conclusion also reached by the prosecutors. The defense attempted to argue that Jenny had recently lost her dog, which Blake claims he assisted her in burying shortly before the murder. They suggested that she might have been in a state of depression and sought a sexual encounter to cope with her grief. However, this explanation is not being taken seriously by anyone. If I just lost my dog, I'm not going to go f*** the neighbor kid. I'm going to get a new dog. I mean, she's not going to risk going to prison over losing her dog. There's not a chance. That makes 0 sense to me. Which is exactly why Blake was charged with first-degree murder. Now, he killed Jenny in 2006, and he turned 18 in 2007. But because this case was so shocking and so senseless and brutal, the jury only felt that it was necessary to seek the maximum sentence, regardless of him being a minor at the time of the murder. He was sentenced to life in prison in November of 2007. Now, our second case takes us back to 2004 in Craig, Alaska, when a hunter found a burning van in the middle of basically nowhere. In the backseat, he saw what he thought to be human remains. The hunter called the police, who raced to the scene to see the van still in flames, and the remains were transported to be examined and identified while police canvassed the area. With there being 0 signs of a driver and no accident damage to the vehicle, investigators quickly realized that this was no accident. So not long after the remains were found, a man by the name of Doc Waterman called police to report his wife, Lori Waterman, missing. Her Chrysler minivan was also missing. Lori had went to a dinner meeting roughly 24 hours prior and had not returned. Her clothes that she wore to this dinner meeting were in the house, which proved that Lori had made it back home before she was killed. Now, Doc and Lori had 2 kids, Jeffrey, their oldest, and Rochelle, their youngest. Jeffrey was off at college on the mainland, and Rochelle was competing at a volleyball tournament at the time her mother was killed. And the husband was off at a Girl Scouts board meeting. But there was only one person in the Waterman family who had motive to seek revenge. Rochelle and her mom didn't have a great relationship, but this was only due to the fact that Rochelle was making poor life choices. And Rochelle had been known to dabble in witchcraft, date much older men, and dressed in goth, which obviously her mother refused to tolerate, as would many of us parents. So Rochelle really resented her mom for not allowing her the freedom that she wanted. Whether or not her life was at risk, it didn't matter. She would then take this frustration and post about it in an online blog. On her blog, titled My Crappy Life, Rochelle writes about her struggles, the fact that she hated the town that she lived in, calling it hell, and she also explains the poor relationship that she had with her mother. Blog posts like this, one after another, would be uncovered by investigators, and they would soon take Rochelle's laptop in as evidence. And now we know this because not long before her laptop was taken, Rochelle posted on her blog, "Just to let everyone know, my mother was murdered. I won't have any computer access until the weekend or so because the police took my computer to go through the hard drive." Clearly more upset with the fact that her device was being taken rather than her mother being killed, which of course was another huge red flag. Investigators figured out that Rochelle actually had 2 older men in her life besides her father and her brother. Rochelle had a relationship with 2 men who were best friends, 𝚃𝚎𝚛𝚛𝚎𝚙, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and Brian Riddell. So Brian was 24 when he had a relationship with Rochelle, and she was 14. After the 2 ended, he then introduced Rochelle to his friend Jason, who went on to also have the same type of relationship with her. Brian and Jason would go on to be what Rochelle saw as protectors. She would confide in them about her life, talking about how her mother abuses her mentally and physically, how she just cannot stand her mother at all, and how her mother would threaten to kill her. In the beginning of Rochelle's interrogation, she told detectives that she had no idea what happened to her mother. But they found out that before her mother's body was found, she told kids at school that her mom probably died in a drunk driving accident. So they questioned her about this, and her story quickly changes, and she explains it was just an assumption based on the alcohol found at the house. They then tell Rochelle, "Look, we know you're lying. We know about Brian and Jason. We know about the blog, yada, yada, yada." So her story changes yet again, and this time she says she just couldn't stop them from killing her mother. She says that Brian and Jason basically did this on their own and that she was scared for her life. They then, of course, call bullshit on this story, pushing her to change her story for, I believe, the 4th time. And now she comes out and says that she had a hand in her mother's murder. She confesses, as reported by NBC, quote, "Then it was that idea started being discussed, murder. And I said, I didn't do a lot of talking. I did a lot of listening because I didn't know what to do. So like I said, it was discussed and I said, well, yes, let's do it." So when she told police that she tried to call the murder off, that was just another one of her lies. Rochelle fully intended for her mother to die. She planned it. She made it happen. She ordered both men to kill her mother due to her abuse. And so, on the night in question, Jason and Brian went to Rochelle's house. This night was chosen by Rochelle as she told him it would be a good window of opportunity. This would be when Lori was the only one home. They broke into Lori's home, tied her up with rope, forced Lori to consume alcohol, and I believe it was wine, and then kidnapped her, keeping her bound in her own back seat. I'm assuming one drove their vehicle while the other drove Lori's minivan. They took her out to a deserted logging area about 40 miles from the Waterman residence. This would be when Brian said he was going to kill Lori. He had her kneel outside the van and he whispered to her that she would never hurt Rochelle again. He then tries to break Lori's neck by pulling up on her chin and down on her forehead, which of course was unsuccessful. Not typically how you're going to be able to break someone's neck without a massive amount of force. I'm assuming he first tried this to make it seem like Lori broke her neck in the accident, but he just wasn't strong enough. He then strangles Lori to death. They drive her car to another area near there, and then they lit her car on fire with Lori's body in the backseat. Now, I'm all for criminals making stupid decisions. It only gets them caught faster. But I think Brian and Jason were on another spectrum of stupid. They let a 16-year-old girl manipulate them into committing murder. They want to stage it as an accident, but do everything they can to make it look like a murder. They didn't take the van and run it into a tree or leave any signs of damage. Lori was killed in a manner that could not occur in a car accident. They wore gloves, yet pieces of them were found at the crime scene, and they left shoe prints on a windowsill where they broke into. And just a few days after her murder, Brian tells a story about a hooded man who cornered him and scratched him and told him to stay away from Rochelle, which obviously was a lie to try and throw off detectives when the scratches were actually from Lori when he tried breaking her neck. Brian was sentenced to 99 years in prison, Jason was sentenced to 50 years in prison, and Rochelle Waterman was sentenced to 3 years in prison. She was released on probation in 2015. And to this day, she continues to claim her innocence as a victim on the exact same blog. Our last case today takes place in Chugiak, Alaska, and occurred not that long ago in 2019. So Denali Bremer had just turned 18 when she was contacted by a 21-year-old man named Darren Schillmiller. He said his name was Tyler, and they quickly struck up a relationship. He told Bremer that he was a millionaire and that he wanted to pay her $9 million to kill someone. So she comes up with the idea of killing her disabled friend, Cynthia Hoffman, who was 19 at the time. And from the information I found, I guess Cynthia suffered from developmental disabilities, and she was also autistic. So Bremer thought it would be a good idea if she had a few of her other friends involved in the murder and told them that they would get a cut of her payout. A 16-year-old boy named 𝚃𝚎𝚛𝚛𝚘, a 15-year-old boy named Caleb Leyland, and 2 other teenagers who were not named were also involved in the murder of Cynthia. Darren wanted Bremer and her friends to take Cynthia out to a deserted area, bind her, assault her, and kill her. He also wanted Bremer to take photos and videos as all of this is happening. He basically wanted a front row seat to this live murder, and in return, he would give her that $9 million. So she gets her friends involved, and we know that Caleb was promised $500,000 by Bremer in exchange for an SUV to use. And on June 2nd, 2019, they pick Cynthia up and they take her out, playing it off as a fun-filled day of hiking and goofing around. Later in the day, they take Cynthia out to Thunderbird Falls. They tie her up with duct tape around her wrist and her ankles, and they place a strip over her mouth as well. Now, they initially told her that this was a game that they were playing, and they videotape all of this for Darren. At some point, the duct tape is removed from Cynthia's mouth and hands, and on video, Cynthia threatens to turn them in for kidnapping and assaulting her. Now, in the autopsy, from the information that I found, there were not any signs that she was assaulted. It is possible to be assaulted in ways that may not be present in an autopsy, but what exactly happened, we don't know for sure. From everyone's account, it was Caden who then shot Cynthia in the back of the head with a 9mm handgun. Bremer then took photos and a video of Cynthia's body before pushing her down into the river, while continuing to take photos for Darren. On June 4th, just a few days after her family reported her missing, Cynthia's body was found by law enforcement on a bank of the Eklutna River. Her feet were still bound together, and her exam showed that she was actually still alive when she was pushed into the river, and her cause of death was drowning. Denali Bremer eventually came clean about the murder, but this was more than likely due to the fact that Darren never paid her, and he was blackmailing her, threatening to turn her in if she didn't assault anyone. During the time after her murder, though, both Bremer and Darren worked together to manipulate a 15-year-old into sending them explicit images, which would later add more charges. Bremer was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Darren Schillmiller was also sentenced to 99 years in prison, and Caleb Leyland and 𝚃𝚎𝚛𝚛𝚘 are to receive their sentences by November of this year.